Hello and welcome to the Sky Blue Times YouTube channel. Today I wanted to run through the out-possession setup that we saw from Manchester City across the first two games, specifically how they were looking to try and manage the long ball situations, try and win more second balls, manage the space in the middle of the pitch to hopefully controls and transitions much better than they did last season, the role that kind of Nico Gonzalez played within that. And as you can see from this graphic here, Nico is dropping back into that back line to provide a +1. So then when the opposition Wolves, in this case of the opening game, were playing these long balls, whether it's from a goal kick or from City pressing them high and forcing them into those situations, City had a 4v3 to be able to deal with that long ball. They had a spare man to hopefully try and outnumber the players there and win those second balls more consistently. And certainly across those first two games, despite the loss against Spurs, we did see them manage those situations in the middle of the pitch much better than we saw for the most part of last season. They had the extra man there. You had Nico that was filling that space in front of the back line, in front of the central defenders, and Rico Lewis had that role of needing to press high, which we'll touch on in a little bit later, and then drop into that back line to be that extra man there. So yeah, it's all kind of hinges on how well Nico reads those situations to know when to drop in, when not to. And if you're going to have a player on you, like he does in the Spurs game, which we'll touch on a bit later, in Sarr, how well do you track that player that's dropped a little bit deeper and then trying to find little pockets of space and pull out wide. So in this game in particular, in the Wolves match, City manages really well from the goal kicks, from when they press Wolves and force them long, so they eat up a lot of these long balls. You would see the stats that City won a lot of aerial duels, won a lot of second balls in this game, simply from forcing Wolves into this situation. And then from that, you could also add that Wolves weren't particularly great at finding solutions around this, knowing that City had that advantage when they did play long. And then if we just move over to this one here, then when City are pressing, you then got this situation where they're still trying to manage that 4v3 situation at the back. So you've still got Nico there with the back line. It's not all the way pressed up in a high press, but then Rico Lewis now has to step up and high press the opposition team. As you can see, Aït-Nouri moves across, Diaz moves across, Stones moves across. So you got that situation there. Nico's there to be able to cut out balls coming inside. He could also drop back a bit, so Stones could come a little bit wider. But that's their kind of focus in this off the back of last season. From what we've seen in these first couple of games, is to manage these situations in the middle of the pitch much better, that you can outnumber the opposition, win long balls, win second balls, and you then, as a result of that, are going to force the opposition teams to play out wide. Now, one thing obviously within this, as we see with Rico Lewis then having to jump up and high press, but then have to get back, ideally you'd want somebody better suited to be able to win those aerial duels, but also have the legs to get up and down the pitch. Now, Matheus Nunes definitely has that capacity, but you are also relying on him to be intelligent enough to know when you need to jump, when you need to drop back, when you need to move inside, etc. And Rico Lewis is much better at moving inside and is a lot more intelligent with his positioning, despite that lack of physicality. And that is ultimately the trade-off that you're making between these two players. And if you want Rico Lewis because you want somebody at right back to move inside more, then it makes more sense to pick him over Matheus Nunes. But then if you don't need your fullback to move inside and you want to use more of the midfielders to drop, then obviously you'd look to try and use Matheus Nunes instead. So there's definitely the trade-off with those two fullbacks. And then across those two issues gives you a bit of an idea of what they will be looking for in a right back. Now, people do talk about different short-term solutions, but those short-term solutions need to be better than these two guys at offering all of the things that you need, rather than coming in as somebody that's short-term, that again ticks some boxes, doesn't tick other boxes, and you're just adding a third guy to the mix that doesn't do it for you. It's why Livramento would be perfect for this role, because he offers all those runs ahead of the ball, underlapping in particular. Is somebody that can move inside, is somebody that can to win the aerial duels, is somebody that can get up and down the pitch and press, intelligent player as well. So he'd obviously be the most ideal player for that. Then if you're looking a little bit wider around Europe, tougher to find somebody that ticks all those boxes, whilst also bearing in mind, in particular this summer, they don't have the space for the non-homegrown players as it stands to be able to bring in a non-homegrown right back. So they are really limited in that position. As much as it is a position they need, you have good temporary options that can definitely do the job in the short term at the moment. And when you're looking at the genuine long-term options that could come in and tick all of the boxes, I think you have to be a little bit honest about what is actually out there. But yeah, as you can see there, as we've gone through for this video, this kind of situation, how City managed this, the right back having to press two players and jump up the pitch and then drop back, how Nico Gonzalez manages that +1 situation to win long balls, is going to be a theme of the season for those two players. Now, we may see Matheus Nunes come into the situation and do a lot better at covering the ground and really be switched on to what he needs to do, and then not needed to be kind of coming inside to midfield. And you find that balance, and actually you look back across this season and you think Nunes did a very good job, and that was the right way to go. And similarly with Nico Gonzalez, not somebody that in the short term is your number 6. Rodri is obviously going to come back to fitness and eventually play. He'd be able to suit this role very well, obviously from his time at Manchester City, winning long balls, winning those kind of second balls as well. He'd be more than fine. So that situation is only going to improve once Rodri comes back into the team, just because he's going to be much more switched on than Nico is, somebody very early into his career and early as a number 6. But then our focus turns to how well do our wide players do in terms of tracking back and supporting these fullbacks, and how well do the fullbacks do when they press. And then if we just go a little bit further into that, if we're looking at somebody like Erling Haaland, Oscar Bob, Jeremy Doku, how well these guys press, how well they curve their runs, will also impact how much harder it is for Rico Lewis, Aït-Nouri to be able to jump up and press high up the pitch. So if Erling Haaland runs straight at this keeper and makes this pass easy for the goalkeeper to do, then Rico Lewis is then suddenly having to go a lot more earlier. And it's a harder situation for him to read the back, knowing his kind of timings of when to jump to apply pressure. So everything is all connected, but if we're looking for kind of two main areas to watch across the opening couple games, it's how well does Nico Gonzalez drop into that back line and manage that +1, and how well does Rico Lewis manage a situation where he needs to be in the back line, but then he also needs to jump up and press an opposition player. Does Guardiola change some of that? Does some of the personnel change that? Just something to keep an eye on. And then now if we just move over to the Spurs game, we then have that knock-on effect where I think they managed the situation in the middle of the pitch really well to win second balls, to win those aerial duels and control that situation quite well. But then what we saw from that, the extension, is that teams would then look to play out wide, combine with players, and Spurs do have somebody in Kudus who's great in these positions. Rico Lewis obviously had a tough job being able to keep track of Johnson that was pushed up high, but then needing to jump up and press Spence. When Haaland struggled to get those runs curved correctly, when Bob, Shirky, etc., when that pressing wasn't very good, you then saw the knock-on effect of Rico Lewis being late for when he was jumping, and then also you think about Aït-Nouri jumping off, Ake coming on due to his injury, somebody that's less suited to pressing high up the pitch, covering a lot of ground, and you began to see more and more problems out on the wide areas. And then from that, as well as I mentioned earlier in the video, how well does Nico track the player in midfield? Sarr here, as we'll get onto in a minute, on the first goal for Spurs. He's floating behind Nico Gonzalez. Long ball comes out. Haaland makes a quite a poor run over here. Long ball eventually gets worked up to Kudus. Ake's nice and tight to him. Long ball comes over the top, and then Sarr drifts out to then be able to win that duel. So yeah, everything, as I mentioned, is connected. Those are going to be kind of the key points. How well does the fullbacks do? How well does Nico Gonzalez manage that +1, but then trap the player in the middle? And as we get to it here, we do see that for that first goal. So Haaland really should be curving out a run a lot better, but he just comes really kind of straight across at Romero, not with any kind of real intensity that you would have liked to see. So it gives him that extra bit of time. Somebody's very good on the ball, Romero. Nice ball into Porro, Marmoush straight at him. A little bit late, so has that kind of timing. As I said, everything kind of knocks on from one to the other. plays that long ball, and particularly with Porro, if you're going to be running at him like the Marmoush is here, key little detail is Porro obviously has a great pass on him. We've seen from his kind of deliveries from set pieces, but if you're going to press like Marmoush is from the inside straight at him in a straight line, and you're giving him the lane to hit a long ball in behind, you're playing into his strength. So really Marmoush should have been curving this run to the touchline and then at Porro, so coming at an angle and curving it, and then that just locks off the long ball that Porro eventually plays for this goal. He doesn't do that, so he plays that long ball, as you can see here. So this is Sarr who's making that run. This is Nico Gonzalez in the space there. So for that brief second there, he switched off and lost track of where Sarr is. Sarr moves over here. Ake's nice and tight on the player here in Kudus, so he's dealt with him to be able to contest that ball, and then because Sarr's been left, Diaz has now got to be dragged all the way out to try and win that. So he's obviously going to be at quite a disadvantage trying to win that from a player he's behind, moving at pace all the way across. That flick on happens. Stones tries to play the offside, slips. Obviously, they've got that intention to try and play the offside line. If he doesn't slip, he probably gets back to be able to cut out that cross, and City don't concede this goal. Very close as well, fine margin to playing that offside. So yeah, a bit of a tough goal concede on that. But if we're looking back at some of the issues, as we mentioned with managing that kind of +1 situation and then a press higher up the pitch, if Haaland doesn't have that real intensity at Romero, you give him that extra second. If Marmoush is going to run straight at Porro instead of closing off his long pass up the pitch, you're playing into his hands there. And then if Nico Gonzalez is switching off in the middle, not tracking Sarr, and Nico definitely had a good game for the most part, I thought. But if you switch off for that split second with Sarr, you then put Diaz in a terrible situation, having to sprint across to try and win that aerial duel, to track that player. And then, yeah, from that, you see Stones get slips up. And then you see Rico exposed for his pace at the back post. But you shouldn't come away from that goal thinking we need a quick lad playing right back. It should be everything else in front, and it all starts from the top of that high press. Now, City ran through the middle in this match like we saw in a lot of games last season, but you can see how if they're not organised with their press, you can still get exposed in the wide areas. And like last season was more about teams breaking through the middle, playing kind of directly through the press. This season will be more about how well they manage those situations out wide. Obviously, those situations won't be as dangerous as going through the middle of the pitch, but still, come up against quality players, quality teams, they will find a way to hurt you if you're not well organised and not switched on for the most part. So yeah, that's just how that kind of all feeds together. And then obviously they get their way into the box, play that cross. Johnson taps in. Trafford probably could have come out a little bit more to close that angle down, but everything starts from the press at the very front. And central to that is how well they're kind of managing those situations with the +1 and so on. But yeah, that's pretty much everything. Just want to do that quick video. I've not had the time to kind of do a deep dive into the Spurs match, but I thought this situation in particular, how City do out of possession, I think is key for this season. We've seen it successful in the Wolves match. We've seen it for the most part successful against Spurs. Saw the struggles there with that opening goal, the mistakes that were made across the pitch. And just that kind of final point I would add is you need Erling Haaland to be better consistently across the season. With the way he presses, I think there's a lot good in there. It's just making those few different tweaks, curving the runs, intensity at the right moments, etc. But you definitely do see him make some really good intense runs at other points in the match. And then when we're looking at the wide areas, when we're looking at the wingers, is how well they're going to be able to press. I just highlighted that mistake by Marmoush. I think Doku's had some mistakes in the Wolves match I touched on in the previous video. So the guys that want to play the most minutes are going to have to do these details and do them very well if they want to be playing week in, week out. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Let me know your thoughts down below. Is there anything you want me to do a video on in the future? Something like this where I kind of pick out a specific point and go into it a bit more detail talking about it. Let me know down below. If there's something else you want to ask me a question about, again, let me know down below. Make sure you like the video to help support the channel, and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on the next video. We'll be back with more content this week.